By January 1973, Lord and Lady Lucan had grown apart. Their marriage had irreconcilably broken down. Lucan moved out of the family home and into a leased apartment at 72A Elizabeth Street, just a few streets away. Lucan was given temporary custody of their 3 children, Francis aged 10, George 7, and Camilla aged 4. A very bitter custody battle ensued. Lucan was certain he would win custody. However, the judge ruled against him, stating that Veronica should have full custody and Lucan only access. Lucan was a broken, desperate man. He was devastated by the judge's decision. He adored his children. He began drinking and gambling even heavier than usual. Not knowing how to cope with such a devastating decision or what to do next. In an act of utter desperation and in a state of intoxication, he employed, as Veronica always suspected he would, a hitman. It was agreed Veronica would be strangled and her body placed in a United States canvas mail sack. In the absence of blood, it was arranged Veronica's body would be placed in the basement safe. The safe was empty as the family silver had already been delivered to Christie's, pending the forthcoming sale, due to take place a few weeks later. Using a canvas sack would not have been capable of holding blood. It would be very difficult without causing seepage and attracting noticeable attention when Lucan would later remove the sack from the house and dispose of his wife's body. Momentarily, he stepped out of his apartment at Elizabeth Street. Detective Chief Inspector David Gehring would later discover Lucan had laid his clothes out in his bedroom, ready to dress for dinner and meet his guests at his club, the Claremont. Lucan's driving licence, money, including loose change, 2 guns, and his passport were all found by Gehring in Lucan's apartment. Hosting his 4 dinner guests, which included Greville Howard, a friend and tenant of Lucan's, Mews House at 3 Eaton Row, at the Claremont Club that evening, was to be his alibi. Little could he ever have dreamt he would never set foot inside his apartment again. Lucan drives to the Claremont Club in his Mercedes. He speaks briefly to the doorman Billy, but nothing of any significance. He drove back to his apartment but didn't go in. With the car parked up, he walked the short distance to the family home. He was expecting to find Veronica's body in the safe. As he approached the house, he could see his wife being attacked in the basement. This was the beginning of his nightmare. He still had a key to the house, so hurriedly let himself in. In the basement, he slipped in a myriad of blood, quickly discovering the blood was Sandra's, his children's nanny. Sandra would usually take Thursday as her day off, but at short notice had changed it. Lucan wasn't expecting to encounter any blood. Not only had the hitman murdered the wrong person, but instead of the agreed method of strangulation, had, for a reason unknown, changed his method in favour of bludgeoning his victim. The hitman runs out of the house past Lucan. Veronica, with blood streaming from her head, is hysterical. Lucan attempted to calm her down. He was not trying to murder her, although later Veronica would later claim he had attempted to murder her. As the situation subdued, they both made their way upstairs so he could get wet towels to clean the blood from Veronica's head. After a period of around some 40 minutes, whilst Lucan was in the ensuite bathroom, Veronica decided to make a dash for it and raise the alarm at the local public house, just yards away. Perhaps it entered her mind then, if her husband were to flee the house, he was not the type of person to give himself up to police. She would then, given that situation, not have to face the possibility of him appealing the judge's decision, and so she would have permanent custody of their 3 children. It was only a very short dash to the local public house. The pub was quiet. By this time, the regular commuters had departed, many for the nearby Victoria station. The head barman was Arthur Whitehouse. The pub door flung open as Veronica entered, shouting, "Help me, help me! I have just escaped from a murderer." In between sobbing, she continued, my children, he's murdered the nanny." The landlord later remarked, "That kind of thing doesn't usually happen around here." A police van with a call sign Alpha Lima 2 and an ambulance were dispatched to the Plumber's Arms. Whilst Veronica was raising the alarm, Lucan had only seconds to make the quickest decision of his life. Should he stay or should he go? He left the house, but where could he go? He had not planned for any of this. This had all gone very badly wrong. He crossed Lower Belgrave Street and walked at speed towards a friend's house at 51 Chester Square, the home of Madeleine Floorman. Police Sergeant Baker and Constable Beddick arrived at 46 Lower Belgrave Street. They forced open the front door. They found the house mainly in darkness. On the top floor, the 5th, in the nursery, George, aged 7, and Camilla, aged 4, were safely sleeping in their beds. Their elder sister, Frances, aged 10, looked bewildered and stood over her siblings. When Lucan failed to get a positive response, he rapidly had to rethink where he could go next. This was the time when friends would show their true loyalty. He realised by now the police would be at the Plumber's Arms, as the local police station, Gerald Road, was only 3 streets away from his family home. Swiftly on foot, he made his way around the corner to Ebury Street. Lucan knocked on a front door. A man answered and invited him in. Unknown to the man, his young son was at the top of the stairs, looking down the staircase as children often do once sent to bed and unable to sleep. Lucan had found temporary refuge. As he talked with his friend, the man's son continued to listen and observe from the top of the staircase. I believe Lucan made 2 telephone calls from this house. One was to Madeleine Floorman, and the other to his mother, who lived at Hanover House, St John's Wood. Lucan left the house in Ebury Street, with police active in the area and stationed outside 46 Lower Belgrave Street. It was too risky to walk. He was driven the short distance to a friend's house, a few streets away.
The very meaning and essence of friendship is to help a man when he's in exactly a position like that. And therefore, he can call on me. Anybody can who's in that close group. And for them, you will take any risk, face any penalty.
Lucan sat at the writing desk, trying hard to focus and compose 2 letters. Both were to his brother-in-law, Bill Shandkid, one about financial matters. Later, he was to write a 3rd letter. This was to his friend Michael Stoop. It confirmed the way he was thinking at this time. He wrote, "The fact that a crooked solicitor and a rotten psychiatrist destroyed me between them. To judge by my last effort in court, no one, let alone a 67-year-old judge, would believe me. I no longer care, except that my children should be protected." As the two men drank, talked and reminisced, the Ford Corsair car TGH43F, which Lucan had borrowed from his friend Michael Stoop, was being abandoned outside 35 Norman Road, New Haven. The two letters written to Bill Shankid were being delivered to Susan Maxwell Scott in nearby Uckfield. The car was planted to create the plausible story that Lucan had escaped that evening, boarding the New Haven to Dieppe ferry. Some would later bizarrely suggest he had boarded the ferry, then committed suicide by jumping overboard into the ship's propellers. The delivery of the two letters to Susan Maxwell Scott, which her daughter posted that Friday morning on her way to school, would give credence to the story that Lucan had visited her in the early hours. Susan said that Lucan left her house saying that he had to get back to sort things out. She interpreted that as meaning get back to London. It is then very hard to believe, as he drives from her house, that he suddenly decides to drive in completely the opposite direction, drive to New Haven, board a ferry just 16 miles away, jump overboard, thereby committing suicide. The whole scene was, of course, established to make the police searching for Lucan search far away from London. Susan was complicit in this arrangement, a deep demonstration of her loyalty and love for John. With the detectives out of London, this would allow for the disposal of Lucan's body. True to fashion, a week later, Detective Inspector Dave Gehring was in France speaking with a local cafe bar owner. The owner was apparently convinced Lucan had sat in her cafe. This police action was the very start of the alleged sightings of Lord Lucan around the world. Over copious amounts of alcohol and broken conversation, Lucan was becoming aware to have a life on the run would be a complete anathema to him. He questioned if he could ever adjust to such a life. He was only 39. Could he really face the rest of his life running and avoiding journalists eager for that exclusive? The failure of his marriage, his failure to obtain custody of his children, considerable mounting debts from persistent daily gambling, and now Sandra's accidental death. One man knew what his friend had to do. There was no question about it. There was no other pragmatic alternative. As the hours slipped by and a new day would soon arrive, realization finally set in for Lucan. He accepted he couldn't spend his life on the run. He had to do the honourable thing. His plan had gone drastically wrong. He had no one to blame other than himself. There was only one price to pay for such failure. He was bound to fall on his own sword. This was now his dream of paranoia. By 6:25 that morning, Friday the 8th of November 1974, Lucan was dead, but the mystery of what happened to Lord Lucan was only just beginning.